Hello there, boys and girls, and welcome to It's a Shaw Thing. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. We're talking some fantasy football, getting ready for the weekend, which means it's time for the Fantasy Tailgate. Only can be found right here at opensports.com. Well, here we go. Let's kick off. We're going to start off with San Diego visiting 4-1 Buffalo Bills. Now, the Bills are coming off a tough loss to Arizona, but more than that, their quarterback took a hit, suffered a concussion in that game a couple of weeks ago. Now they have a bye. Edwards expects to go right back out there. However, I would be reluctant to start him. On the other hand, Lee Evans, Marshawn Lynch should both be pretty safe picks. San Diego, you got to love what you saw from Vincent Jackson last weekend. So if Chris Chambers is out, you certainly do put Vincent Jackson in. Philip Rivers, no matter what, is a must-start these days, as is Antonio Gates. And LaDainian Tomlinson, how could you not start him? Next up, New Orleans going against Carolina. New Orleans, well, they're a great team as far as moving the ball around, and now they get Marcus Colston back. Jeremy Shockey's going to be back. Reggie Bush should enjoy the role that he maintains. As far as Lance Moore, a lot of people asking, what should we do with him? Keep in mind, they still do need that second and third receiver. So that being said, if Colston's number one, Lance Moore will become the number two guy. I still expect him to get between 40 and 80 receiving yards per week. So if you're looking for someone from the third receiver spot, he still is a decent option. Deuce McAllister, also a decent late option as well. As far as Carolina, they're bound to bounce back. Look at the numbers from Delhomme. The only thing that really hurt him were the interceptions and, of course, a lack of touchdowns. Perhaps the two were related. I would start him. I think he does bounce back playing at home against a soft defense. I also would start D'Angelo Williams, and I definitely would start Muhsin Muhammad, Steve Smith. Both wide receivers have been great so far, but check the injury report on Muhammad. He's a little banged up. Next up, Minnesota going against Chicago. Who would have thunk it? These two teams are throwing the ball these days. Bernard Berrian on Minnesota is a must-start, as is Adrian Peterson for Chicago. Not a bad idea to start Kyle Orton. He's going against the secondary. He could certainly take care of. Rasheed Davis, also a decent start. Devin Hester looked good last weekend. Matt Forte must and should start every single week. Keeping it going, we got Pittsburgh going against Cincinnati. Cincinnati is really a debacle these days. Carson Palmer once again will not be in action. Ryan Fitzpatrick will start. Not much fantasy value there. Hushmanzada, I would start him. Their backfield is crowded with Kenny Watson returning. I wouldn't start any of those guys. For Pittsburgh, start pretty much everyone. The only thing to look after is Willie Parker. Is he healthy? If not, Muelde Moore once again could be a decent starting option there. Tennessee going against Kansas City. I'm sure Tennessee will remain undefeated, but what about the fantasy impact? Well, Bo Scaife at tight end should be pretty good. Justin Gage as well as a decent option. I like Chris Johnson. Lendell White is a little bit of a gamble. He's been getting the touchdowns, but not many yards, so only start him if you have to. As far as Kansas City, their big weapon, Larry Johnson, will not play. He is suspended. Tony Gonzalez is still with Kansas City, so you can start him, but that's pretty much it there. Next up, Baltimore going against Miami. Baltimore, of course, dismantled by Indianapolis this past weekend. That doesn't mean you should necessarily start Chad Pennington if you don't have to. As far as who you should start, Greg Camarillo remains one of the better fantasy options at wide receiver. As far as running backs, Ronnie Brown's been great as well. And Chad Pennington, if you have to, you could start him. As far as Baltimore goes, Willis McGahee, the only reason he didn't play much last weekend is because the score was out of hand, but ideally he will be the number one back for that team. I'd start him, and that is pretty much it for them. Next up, San Francisco against the New York Giants. For San Francisco, you have to like what you saw last week from Cleveland, but this game will be in the Meadowlands, and the Giants looking to bounce back. J.T. O'Sullivan, if you're desperate, not a horrible option. Isaac Bruce, also not a bad option as well. Frank Gore is obviously a must-start. For the New York Giants, start pretty much everyone. Everyone there is going to have a big game. Brandon Jacobs, Eli Manning, Plaxico Burress. The one that you have in question is Steve Smith. Check out him in the role of Amani Toomer. Smith might end up being the guy who's going to become the second receiver for that team. If so, he will carry significance, but at this point, you might want to wait and see. Next up, Dallas going against St. Louis. With Dallas, it's tough these days. A lot of changes there. Roy Williams was brought in. Tony Romo might be in. He might be out. Whoever the quarterback is, you have to start them. There's just too many weapons to go around. Roy Williams is so good, you got to start him. You also got to start Terrell Owens. You also have to start Jason Wynn, Marion Barber. Remember, Felix Jones is injured. Do not start him, but everyone else are pretty good starts. Only guy I'd be reluctant to start these days, Patrick Creighton. So many wide receivers there, and with Roy Williams coming in, Creighton's the one that seems to be on the odd end of it. As far as St. Louis goes, well, Mark Bolger is going against a secondary that he should be able to take advantage, but he hasn't done it so far this season, so unless if you have to, you probably want to keep him on the bench. The only guy I would start from St. Louis is Steven Jackson, because even without the touchdown, he has been racking up the yards. Moving on, we got Detroit against Houston. You gotta love Houston this weekend. All of them. Matt Schaub should have a huge day. I think he's one of the best fantasy options this weekend. He is my big pick. I think he's going to be just great. Andre Johnson, Kevin Walsh, falter. Steve Slate has been very good as well. As far as Detroit, Calvin Johnson, and that's it. Remember, Kitten is out for the year. Roy Williams no longer there. I guess we'll see if Sean McDonald steps up. He could be an interesting option. As far as the backfield, it's split pretty much even. Rudy Johnson, Kevin Smith. Not good. Indianapolis against Green Bay, both teams struggling at the running back position, but Dominic Rhodes will start in pretty much as the only option for Indianapolis. Because of that, I think he's a pretty good option to start this weekend. I also would start Peyton Manning, Marvin Harrison, Reggie Wayne. Those are all safe picks. As far as their tight end, he's been good in the past, but let's wait for him to have some bigger games before we could start him. As far as Green Bay goes, Greg Jennings has been the #1 wide receiver so far. Aaron Rodgers, the best quarterback so far. Both of those guys are must-starts every single week, but I will say this. I think the Colts defense is improving drastically, so be careful. They could shut them out. New York Jets against the Oakland Raiders. Well, this will be interesting. Thomas Jones should get the ball aplenty, maybe not 3 touchdowns, but this is not a team that's going to engage Brett Favre in a shootout, so the Jets will be able to keep their offense balanced. So Thomas Jones will get his carries, will get his yards. Jericho Cotchery, Lavernius Coles, Brett Favre, all fantastic starts. For Oakland, Zach Miller, tight end. That's all I'm going to give you. As far as the running backs, it's ugly. It's split with 3 now. As far as the passing game, it doesn't exist. Against New Orleans last week, 37% pass completion rate for Jamarcus Russell, former #1 pick overall. Maybe we could see why Lane Kiffin wasn't exactly thrilled about that. Cleveland going against Washington. Can they make it 2 in a row? Cleveland does get Kellen Winslow Jr. back, so that's good news for them. Braylon Edwards seemed to break out this past weekend. Derek Anderson, in my book, isn't the worst start. I think he's actually one of the better options for Washington. Jason Campbell's a little hit or miss, but he doesn't hurt you with interceptions, at least not so far. As far as their running game, Clinton Portis is the best in the league. Don't get too excited about Sean Alexander. He's brought in to be a backup. He at the most will get 7 carries. Not much influence there. Chris Cooley, a must start. Santana Moss, a risky place, and sometimes he shows up, sometimes he doesn't, but when he does, it's a big bang, so I certainly would start him. And then we got Seattle going against Tampa Bay. Seattle is a mess these days. Seneca Wallace is going to be starting for them. Wouldn't start pretty much anyone there, maybe Bobby Ingram. As far as the running game, Julius Jones is now splitting carries with Maurice Morris, who is back from his injury, so nothing to get too excited about there. As far as Tampa Bay, Joey Galloway does anticipate coming back this weekend, but I probably would wait and see him play an entire game before I start him. Garcia, one of those safe picks, not going to give you huge numbers, but he shouldn't hurt you, which is good news. Ernest Graham will be back in the backfield. He won't be used as a fullback this time, so he will get some yards. Warwick Dunn, on the other hand, is not going to have quite the production, probably won't come close to 20 rushing attempts this time. And finally, we're talking Monday night. We've got a good one here. We're talking about the Patriots going against the Denver Broncos. So what to expect? Honestly, Matt Castle is so unpredictable at this point. I do happen to think that the Broncos are going to shine, though. This is a team that could certainly put up plenty of big numbers, and Eddie Royal coming back should help balance that offense. As far as the running game, again, Michael Pittman seems to be the best option. For the Patriots, it is a split backfield with Lamont Jordan getting in the action, Sammy Morris, and of course Lawrence Maroney. All those guys will be splitting carries, which pretty much takes care of all of their value. As far as the quarterback position, Matt Castle is just incredibly unpredictable. Only start him if you really have to. Randy Moss, I think you have to start him. The guy is capable of such big plays. And Wes Welker, he's been somewhat consistent so far this year, averaging over 60 yards a game. That's right around 1,000 yards on the season, so I think you have to start him as well. Well, my friends, that is your fantasy football tailgate, getting you ready for Week 7 in the NFL. We'll talk more about it on Monday. Until then, hey, best of luck.
So you think you can tackle a pro? There's only one way to find out. Click on fantasy at opensports.com.